There are things God does not reveal to the curious, but allows to be spoken to the obedient. Saint Brigid of Sweden did not seek visions, she feared them, not because she doubted God, but because she knew the weight carried by souls chosen to see the invisible. A faithful wife, mother of 8 children, an ordinary woman in difficult times, and later a widow devoted to prayer. Nothing in her asked for the extraordinary. But God does not choose the prepared, He prepares the chosen. It was the 14th century. Europe was bleeding in wars, the church was groaning in divisions, and the faith of many was cooling like forgotten embers. It was in this dark time that God wanted to speak, and He chose for this not a theologian full of certainties, but a woman broken by pain and strengthened by obedience. One night, in deep prayer, Saint Brigid felt something that did not come from her, a cold that burned. The candle before the crucifix trembled without any wind, a presence that was not visible but was more real than anything seen. Her hands began to tremble, and then she heard, not with her ears, but with her heart, a soft and trembling voice, tired but full of hope. It was the voice of a soul that had already died and still suffered. Saint Brigid did not flee. She could have closed her eyes, covered the ears of her soul, asked for silence, but she knew. When God allows the dead to speak, it is not to frighten the living, it is to save them. With a choked voice, the first question came out, asking why the soul was there, why it still suffered if it had already died. And the answer came clear and painful, explaining that it had loved God, but not enough to die completely to itself. Saint Brigid trembled, her hands sweated cold. It was not a condemnation, it was a naked truth. That soul had not hated God, had not blasphemed, had not chosen evil, but also had not chosen God with everything. It had kept small reserves, small hidden selves, thinking that God would not see, thinking it did not matter. And there it was in purgatory. Not because God was cruel, but because heaven is pure and nothing impure can enter it. The soul continued with a voice that seemed to come from far away, but echoed inside the chest. It had loved Him, yes, but also loved its own will. It had served, yes, but served hoping to be seen. It had prayed, yes, but prayed hoping to feel. And when it did not feel, it stopped. It thought this did not matter, but every choice matters. Every detail is seen, and love that is not total is love that still needs to burn. Saint Brigid wrote every word, even trembling. The pen scratched the parchment with force. She wrote because she knew. That was not only for her, it was for us, for you who now listen, for all who think that loving God from time to time is sufficient, who think that small sins do not count, who think that God does not care about the details. He cares, and that soul, even burning, still loved, still hoped, still knew that in the end everything would be worth it. Because purgatory is not abandonment, it is the last mercy, the last fire that purifies before the eternal light. Saint Brigid closed her eyes and whispered a Hail Mary. The voice of the soul echoed grateful, then disappeared in the silence. But the questions were just beginning. What many call detail, heaven calls delay. Saint Brigid breathed deeply, wiped the sweat from her forehead. The first answer still echoed in her soul like a distant bell, but there was more. God had permitted that voice to continue, and she, obedient, asked again what sin had brought the soul there. The answer came slowly, as one who chooses each word, knowing it will be remembered for centuries. They were not great sins in the eyes of the world. It had not killed, not stolen, not blasphemed against God, but had disobeyed in small things many times and thought this did not matter. Saint Brigid stopped writing, looked at the parchment, looked at her own hands, and felt the weight of those words as if they were stones on her chest. Small disobediences, small lies, small judgments, small negligences in prayer, small lacks of charity, small silences when it was time to speak, small words when it was time to be silent. The soul continued, and there was sadness in the voice, but also lucidity. It thought that God did not see, or that if he saw, he did not care, but he sees everything, and every no that it said to him, every time it chose its will instead of his, every moment it was lukewarm when he asked for fire, all of this remained, and now it needed to be purified. The saint hesitated, but needed to know how the suffering was there, if it was like the suffering on earth, and the soul responded with a clarity that makes any attentive heart tremble. No. On earth, the suffering passes. You can distract yourself from it, flee from it, and sleep to forget it. Here, the suffering purifies, and there is no escape, no distraction, no sleep.
There is only the fire that consumes everything that is not love, and this fire is at the same time torment and mercy. Torment because it burns, mercy because it transforms. St. Brigid felt her throat tighten. The candle at her side flickered. She wrote with trembling hands and then, gathering courage, questioned whether the soul could pray for itself, whether it could do something to relieve its pain. The silence that followed was long, heavy, and when the voice returned, it was almost a whisper. No, the time of merit ended. It could no longer do anything for itself. It could only wait. Wait for the living to pray. Wait for someone to offer a mass. Wait for someone to remember it. This was perhaps the most painful answer of all, because it means this: after death, you can no longer help yourself. You can no longer pray for yourself. You can no longer repent in a way that generates merit. You can no longer change. You depend completely on the mercy of God and the charity of the living. How many souls are there at this exact moment waiting for someone to pray for them? How many mothers, fathers, grandparents, forgotten friends? How many souls who in life prayed for us and now wait in silence for us to do the same for them? St. Brigid understood and wrote with tears in her eyes, urging people to pray for the dead, not to wait for death to remember them, to pray now, because after you die, it will be too late for you to pray for yourself. The small is not small in the eyes of God. The detail is not detail. Each choice sculpts the soul, and heaven does not accept souls halfway. Each mass offered for a soul is like living water poured over burning fire. St. Brigid felt her heart heavy, but did not give up. There was hope in the words of that soul, even amid suffering. She wiped the tears from her face and then asked, almost pleading, what relieved the soul's pain? What could help it? The answer came quickly, as if the soul had been waiting for this question for a long time. The Holy Mass. Each Mass offered for it was like living water poured over burning fire. When a priest celebrates Mass and someone offers it for the soul, it feels a relief that it cannot describe. It is as if part of the fire goes out, as if heaven gets closer. The Mass reaches where words do not arrive, where common prayers do not penetrate. Because in the Mass, it is not man who intercedes for it, it is Christ himself. St. Brigid stopped, breathed deeply, wrote every word with reverence, and understood something that many forget. The Mass is not a ritual, it is a rescue. It is not a repetition, it is Calvary itself becoming present, and each Mass celebrated on earth has power over purgatory. How many Masses are celebrated every day without anyone offering them for a soul? How many souls could be relieved, liberated, taken to heaven, if only someone remembered them upon hearing the bell of consecration? The soul continued, now with a softer voice, almost grateful. Each rosary prayed with love, each small sacrifice accepted in silence, each act of charity done in its name. All of this reaches it. All of this reaches it, and all of this brings it closer to the light. With a firm voice, St. Brigid made the sixth question, asking if the soul regretted being there. And the soul responded with an honesty that cuts like a blade. No, it did not regret suffering, because it knew that this suffering purified it. It knew that in the end it would see the face of God, and this was worth any pain. but it regretted not having loved more when it could, not having prayed more when it had time, not having said yes to God with more fervor, with more surrender, with more truth. It stopped and then continued with a voice that sounded like an ancient lament. It thought it had time. It thought it could love God better tomorrow. It thought that small failures did not matter, but now it sees. Each moment was a chance. Each day was a gift, and it wasted so many gifts. St. Brigid felt tears flow. They were not tears of despair. They were tears of one who understands, of one who sees their own life reflected in those words. And then came the seventh question, perhaps the most important of all. The saint closed her eyes before pronouncing it, asking what most surprised the soul after death. The silence was long, deep, as if the soul searched for human words to describe the indescribable. And then it responded, explaining the holiness of God and how much it had treated it lightly. St. Brigid trembled. The crucifix on the wall seemed to shine brighter. She wrote slowly, afraid to miss a single letter. The soul explained that on earth it thought it knew God. It prayed, went to Mass, spoke of Him, but did not know Him truly. It did not understand His absolute holiness, His infinite purity, His perfect justice. It treated Him as if He were only goodness. And He is goodness, yes, but He is also fire. He is also light that consumes everything that is not true.
And when we die, there are no more veils, no more excuses. We see God as He is, and we see ourselves as we really are, and the difference is abysmal. St. Brigid closed her eyes, prayed in silence, and understood that purgatory does not exist because God is cruel. It exists because He is holy, so holy that nothing impure can be before Him, and at the same time so merciful that He gives us a last chance to be purified, to be prepared, to become worthy of eternal light. The soul whispered before falling silent, urging people not to take God lightly. He is love, but love that transforms, love that demands everything, love that does not accept half-truths. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And then the silence returned, but now it was a silence full of hope. For many souls, the last warning has already passed. St. Brigid was tired, not physically, but spiritually. Each answer from that soul weighed like lead in her heart. But she knew she needed to continue, that those words were not only for her. Then, gathering strength, she asked what the most common mistake of the living was. The answer came immediately, as if the soul had been waiting for this question from the beginning. Thinking there will always be time. St. Brigid stopped, mentally reread the words, and the soul continued. The living think there will always be a tomorrow to repent, a next month to pray better, a next year to change their lives. They say, when I retire, I will pray more. When my children grow up, I will dedicate myself to God. When I have time, I will help the poor. But time is not promised, and for many, the last warning has already passed without them noticing. St. Brigid felt a shiver run down her spine. Her hands froze. How many times had she herself thought that way? How many times had she postponed a prayer, a work of charity, a request for forgiveness, thinking there would be another chance? The soul sighed, and it was a sigh that came from very deep. It also thought it had time. On the last morning of its life, it woke up as always. It had coffee, made plans for the week, thought of things it would do later, but there was no later. And when it realized, it was already before God, and everything it had planned to do was left behind, not accomplished, not lived, only planned. St. Brigid wrote with trembling hands, and then, cautiously, questioned whether sudden death was a punishment from God. The answer came firm, clear, explaining that it is a permission. St. Brigid frowned, confused, and the soul explained that God permits sudden death when He knows the soul would not resist a greater warning, when He knows that prolonged suffering would not convert it, but would only harden it more, when He knows it has already had all the necessary warnings and did not hear them. So, out of mercy, He removes it before it is completely lost. Sudden death is not cruelty, it is protection. St. Brigid breathed deeply. That changed everything. Sudden death was not a sign of condemnation. It was a sign that God, knowing the heart, knew exactly the right moment to call that soul home. But the soul did not finish. However, this does not mean we are ready. Many die without being prepared. They die with unconfessed sins, with unforgiven pardons, with unprayed prayers, with unlived loves. And then they arrive here in purgatory, not condemned, but also not ready, and need to be purified. St. Brigid felt the weight of those words, and then made the 10th question, almost like a silent cry, asking what the soul asked of the living. The voice of the soul changed. It became stronger, clearer, as if its entire existence was summed up in that plea. Pray now, not later, now. St. Brigid wrote, and the soul continued hurriedly, like one who knows time is short. Do not wait to be ready. Do not wait to feel like it. Do not wait to have time to spare. Pray now, even tired. Pray now, even feeling nothing. Pray now, even with a busy life, because tomorrow may be too late, not for God, who is eternal, but for you, who are mortal. The soul paused, and then said something St. Brigid would never forget. Offer a Mass today, not next week, today. Pray a rosary today, not when you feel like it, today. Ask for forgiveness today, forgive today, love today, because your today is the yesterday I did not take advantage of, and now I can only wait for someone to do for me what I did not do for myself. St. Brigid felt tears roll down her face. They were not tears of sadness. They were tears of one who understands, of one who awakens, of one who finally sees that life is not a rehearsal. It is the only performance we will have. And the soul whispered before the voice began to drift away, urging people to live as if each day were the last, because for some of them it will be. The silence returned, but now it was a silence that urged, that summoned, that called to action. Knowing much and loving little is the weight that burns most.
St. Brigid breathed deeply. The urgency of the previous words still echoed in her chest. She wiped away the tears, but there was more to ask, more to understand. And then, with a soft voice, she questioned who suffered most in purgatory. The answer came slowly, laden with sadness. Those who knew much and loved little. St. Brigid stopped, closed her eyes, let the words penetrate deeply. The soul continued explaining that knowing the truth and not living it is worse than never having known it, because truth demands a response. And when you know what is right, but choose what is easy, when you know the way but do not follow it, when you receive light but prefer shadow, then the weight of knowledge becomes fire. St. Brigid trembled. She thought of all the theologians, preachers, spiritual masters who knew God in books but not in the heart, who taught love but did not practice it, who spoke of the cross but never carried it. The soul sighed, explaining that it knew God was merciful but was not merciful, knew it should forgive but kept grudges, knew it should love enemies but avoided them. It knew so much, and it used its knowledge to justify itself, not to transform itself. And now that knowledge burns, because at every moment it sees how much it could have been and was not. St. Brigid wrote with tears in her eyes, and then, almost pleading, inquired what accelerates the liberation of a soul, what can be done. The voice of the soul lit up, as if it could finally speak of hope. The masses, always the masses. Each Mass offered for a soul is like a ray of light that crosses the darkness and brings relief. There is no more powerful prayer, no stronger intercession, because in the Mass it is not we who ask, it is Christ who offers himself. And before him the fire of purgatory bows. St. Brigid felt her heart accelerate, and the soul continued, explaining that also the sacrifices accepted in silence matter. That tiredness you do not complain about, that pain you do not transform into complaint, that humiliation you do not retaliate, all of this, if offered for a soul, arrives here and relieves and liberates. The soul paused, and then said something St. Brigid never expected to hear. And the rosary prayed with love.
Each Hail Mary is like a kiss from the Most Holy Mother on our burning forehead. Each meditated mystery is like a balm on the wound. Mary does not abandon her children, not even here. She intercedes, she consoles, she brings us closer to her Son. St. Bridget cried openly, pressed the rosary against her chest. The candle at her side flickered gently, and then, with a trembling voice, she made the next question, asking if the soul could see heaven. The silence that followed was long, deep, as if the soul searched for strength to respond. And then came the answer, and it was at the same time beautiful and painful. Yes, it could see heaven. St. Bridget waited, and the soul continued, explaining that it saw its light in the distance, saw its beauty, saw the joy of the saints, saw everything that awaited it, and this was at the same time what hurt most and what consoled most. The voice trembled. It hurt because it knew it could not yet enter. It knew there were still imperfections in it that needed to be burned. It knew it was not yet worthy to be before the one who was holiness itself. And each moment that passed, seeing the light but not being able to reach it, was an agony it could not describe. But then the voice changed, became softer, more hopeful, explaining that it also consoled because it knew he was there, knew it was not abandoned, knew this suffering had an end. It knew that at the right time it would enter, and when it entered, when it finally entered, all the pain would have been worth it, because it would see the face of God, and nothing in this world or the other compares to that. St. Bridget wrote the last word, closed her eyes, and prayed. She prayed for the souls of purgatory, prayed for the living who still had time. She prayed for herself so that she would never waste the grace that was still given to her. The soul whispered, almost inaudible, urging people not to waste knowledge, not to let it become just theory, to live what they know, love what they know, because knowing without loving is the heaviest weight of all. And then the silence returned, but now it was a luminous silence, full of hope. Do not live as if God were distant. He is closer to death than you imagine. St. Bridget felt that the final moment had come. Her hands trembled, her heart beat strongly, but there were still two questions that would close that dialogue between heaven and earth, and she asked them, "If you could return to earth, would you return?" The answer came immediate, without hesitation. Yes, it would return for a single day. Because someone who is already on the way to heaven would desire to return to the world of pain and illusion. And the soul explained that it would return to suffer more and love better. St. Bridget stopped breathing for an instant. The soul continued, and there was a deep longing in the voice. Because on earth each pain has value, each tear can be offered, each humiliation can generate merit, each moment of patience can transform into eternal light. Here it suffered, but this suffering did not generate new merit. It only burned what was already stained. But on earth, there on earth, each second is a chance to grow, to love, to give oneself. The voice trembled, explaining that if it returned, it would not live the same way. It would not waste a single moment. It would love each person as if it were the last time seeing them. It would pray each prayer as if it were the last. It would embrace each cross as if it were a gift. Because now it knows. It knows that life is not a burden. It is a chance that does not return. St. Bridget wrote with tears rolling on the parchment, and then with a firm voice made the last question, the 15th, the one that would close everything, asking for a last warning, a last word. The silence was long, deep, as if the entire heaven waited for that answer. And then the soul spoke, and its voice echoed like a bell in the middle of the night. Do not live as if God were distant. He is not far. He is closer to death than you imagine. St. Bridget trembled. The candle went out and relit by itself. She wrote word by word, knowing that each one would be read for centuries. The soul continued explaining that people think they have time, but do not know how much. They think God is far, but He observes every thought. They think small sins do not matter, but everything matters. Everything. Each choice, each word, each silence, everything is being weighed. The voice became softer, but no less urgent. So, do it now. Love now. Forgive now. Pray now. Do not wait to feel like it. Do not wait to be ready. Do it now, because now is all you have. St. Brigid sighed. The pen fell from her hand. She picked it back up, trembling, and continued writing. The soul whispered, and now the voice began to drift away, asking people to pray for them, pray for the forgotten souls, for those who have no one to intercede. Offer masses, pray the rosary, make small sacrifices, because all of this reaches them, all of this relieves them. And then, before the voice disappeared completely, the soul said that death is not the end, it is the beginning of eternity, and eternity is prepared now. Watch, therefore, because you know neither the day nor the hour. Do not waste life, because it is short, but its consequences are eternal. The silence returned, full of hope, full of urgency, full of mercy. St. Brigid wrote the last word, closed her eyes, and prayed for all the souls of purgatory, for all the living who still had time, for herself. And then she opened her eyes, looked at the parchment, and knew that was not only for her, it was for everyone, for you who now read these words. If this message reached you, it was not by chance. Offer today a Mass for a forgotten soul of purgatory. Pray a rosary. Make a small sacrifice. Forgive someone. Love someone. Do something that has eternal value, because tomorrow may be too late, but today is still time.